Cannot go around sacrificing your whole team. The next thing you know, when you lonely, you go around and tweet about the shit like you going through postpartum depression. Shut the fuck up. You know what you were signing into.
Badazz didn't just mention Kodak Black's name. He revived a messy 2021 scandal that many thought was long buried. Once those papers popped up again, everything started looking way deeper than anyone expected. Truth is, Boosie pulled the lid off a case that never really cooled down, and suddenly Kodak's name was sitting right on top of some brand new documents tied to a fresh investigation. Things got tense fast. The latest talk swirling online is wild but serious. People are saying Kodak might have dropped around $20,000 connected to a certain street situation involving someone from the Wiz the Wizard circle. These claims reportedly came from old legal files tied to the Grand Mafia and Danya Hot Boys cases that officials in Broward County have quietly been piecing together for a long time. And here's the thing, Boosie didn't make that number up. He just said what others whispered behind closed doors. But let's be clear, Kodak Black hasn't been charged with anything linked to that 2021 situation. There's no official case with his name leading it. What does exist, though, is a bunch of speculation, financial mentions, and links being examined by investigators that could make things messy. Back in September 2021, Wiz was tragically found lifeless in Hallandale Beach, left in a yard under mysterious circumstances. Investigators later confirmed he didn't lose his life there. He was moved, and the car tied to the case was burned, wiping out key evidence. After that, the trail went ice cold for a long time. But now, years later, Broward County authorities have officially linked multiple members of the same crew to serious organized activity, charges like racketeering, conspiracy, and multiple violent incidents, confirming that Bu's case wasn't some random street dispute, but part of a much bigger operation. And that's where Kodak Black's name keeps showing up again and again. Not as a main suspect, but as a name mentioned inside the files. Specifically where investigators describe money being passed around for something serious. Naturally, everyone connected those dots right back to Wiz's situation, treating him as the first visible figure in that alleged chain of events. When Boosie Badazz jumped into the conversation, it suddenly felt like the streets had gotten a stamp of validation. Remember, Boosie doesn't speak lightly when it comes to official paperwork. He's built his whole image around calling out fake talk, testing who's really authentic, and exposing where the public version doesn't match the legal one. So when he starts hinting that Kodak's hands aren't clean, people can't help but stop and wonder what he really knows. At the very least, it makes you ask, why does Kodak's name keep popping up around all this? And even more, how come the same crew now facing those serious charges in Wiz's case is also being accused of multiple other connected crimes across Broward County? If Wiz da Wizard's case was really tied to a paid setup, and that chain of events didn't end with him, then he wasn't the only name tangled in this web. Once you dig into those files, it's crystal clear. Wiz the Wizard wasn't the start of the story. He was just the first name the public heard. Sitting in the middle of it all is a man named Sigmund Brown, better known as Liberia Sig, whose name keeps popping up right at the core of this entire network. His name didn't come up from one random arrest. It showed up in a huge legal filing tied to the Grand Mafia and Danya Hot Boys setup, the same structure now accused of multiple organized incidents stretching all across Broward County. And what's key here is that investigators aren't treating this as a one-time event or a random act. It's being presented as a coordinated network with serious leadership and intent. Prosecutors officially built this as a gang-related case. And according to the documents, Wiz the Wizard's end isn't listed as an isolated situation. It's considered part of a larger organized pattern. But here's where things really flip, especially when Boosie Badazz's name enters the mix. Buried deep inside those legal motions is a line that defense lawyers were clearly trying to tone down. The claim that Kodak Black allegedly offered around $20,000 connected to Wiz the Wizard's situation. And this is where people need to slow down and pay attention. That $20,000 figure isn't just street talk. It came straight from a defense motion, which means it was written by a lawyer whose job is to protect their client, not make the situation look worse. Attorneys don't put something like that in writing unless they're responding to something already sitting on the state's table. Now, this part isn't exactly a confession, but it's not a straight denial either. It's a legal chess move, meant to say, even if the state's claims were true, it still doesn't prove my client actually made a payment or had direct involvement, and that tiny distinction matters big time in the courtroom. In legal terms, there's a serious gap between offering money and actually paying it, and that gap can change everything. But here's the detail everyone keeps circling back to. You can't just brush it off. Even offering money for something shady still lives in the world of conspiracy, and that alone shows intent. Once investigators see a name like Kodak Black inside that kind of context, they don't just erase it because no charges have been filed yet. That's why this whole conversation just won't fade away. It keeps coming back stronger each time. And if people's talk about Kodak allegedly putting $20,000 toward Wiz the Wizard's situation had any truth to it, that changes everything. It turns what looked like a personal fallout into something that feels more like a calculated move. Once you start seeing it from that angle, the whole story flips. It's no longer about emotion, it's about business. What makes it even heavier is the history between them. Wiz the Wizard and Kodak weren't strangers. They grew up on the same Broward County soil, came through the same streets, and both repped the Sniper Gang brand. Wiz wasn't just another artist, he was treated like family. After years of being in Kodak's circle, Wiz finally got that official stamp, signing under the Sniper Gang banner. On the outside, everything looked tight. They were in music videos together in the studio, moving like a solid team. In those Sniper Gang visuals, Wiz the Wizard wasn't just standing in the background, he was front and center right next to Kodak, like part of the inner squad. Tracks like Vultures Cry 2 and other SG drops made it seem like this was more than business, it was brotherhood. But behind the cameras and flashy moments, that brotherly energy didn't last long. The first cracks showed up where they usually do: money and contracts. Wiz the Wizard started feeling like he was getting shorted on his deal, convinced that his worth was way beyond what was written on the papers. Around that same time, word started spreading that Wiz had even tried to buy himself out for a much higher amount, and that move only stretched the tension further. And once the business side starts shaking, personal bonds usually fall apart too. That's when the tension became impossible to hide. Looking back now, people don't just see two rappers who drifted apart. They see a friendship that quietly froze over. And in environments like that, silence breeds resentment, rumors, and bigger problems. So when Wiz the Wizard tragically passed in 2021, fans didn't just ask who was behind it, they started asking why everything around the situation felt strange. When Kodak Black's reaction surfaced afterward, it left more confusion than comfort. But Wiz wasn't the only person caught in that storm. This was all connected to the wider Hot Boys network, a structured group with smaller branches, roles, and figures like Liberia Sig leading parts of it. From 2021 through 2024, the same pattern repeated. Different scenes, different names, but the same organization floating in the background. Take the Best Buy incident in Plantation, for example. It wasn't something that happened in a hidden spot. It went down in broad daylight, in a public space. Tragically, a young person lost their life, and several others, including innocent bystanders, were injured. Prosecutors later connected that event to Liberia Sig and members of the Grand Mafia, saying that moment made it clear this wasn't some isolated case. It was part of an organized setup that had been operating for years. Then came the I-95 highway ambush in Fort Lauderdale, another calculated attack, car to car, where two people were fatally targeted. Authorities described it as a well-planned hit, not a random act, the kind that takes serious preparation and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're backed by something much bigger than yourself. And it didn't stop there. There was also the laundromat attack, another public setting, another specific target taken out in front of everyone. Each one of these scenes told the same story, the same structure, the same names, and a growing sense that Broward County street politics had turned into something much darker and way more organized. Multiple masked figures, a quick getaway, and another name added to a growing list of connected hits. That's how authorities are now framing this case. Investigators have officially placed that incident inside the same organized campaign tied to a string of attacks that happened at homes, in driveways, and even inside vehicles. all allegedly carried out to boost or protect the gang's influence. When you piece all that together, Wiz the Wizard's passing stops looking like a random tragedy in a tough city. It starts to look like one move in a much bigger plan. It's not an isolated headline anymore. It's one event on a timeline, one entry in a larger pattern that started before Wiz the Wizard and continued long after him. And when you mix in Kodak Black's strange behavior since Wiz's end, it makes people question whether it was all just coincidence. Because when someone close to you is gone, how you move publicly matters just as much as what you say out loud. After Wiz the Wizard's end, in September 2021, fans immediately turned their eyes to Kodak's social media pages. Everyone was waiting for him to speak out clearly, to post something heartfelt, or even go live to show some emotion. But that's not what they got. Instead, Kodak started dropping cryptic tweets, talking about being misunderstood, feeling like everyone was turning on him, and struggling with heavy emotions. Those posts from Kodak Black were mixed right between jokes, new music talk, and random everyday moments. And that contrast threw everyone off. Some fans thought they were seeing a man in real pain, going through something heavy. Others said it looked like he was making light of a dark situation while someone close to him was gone. That uneasy mix made people start side-eyeing everything. So when, years later, the paperwork started resurfacing and Boosie Badazz spoke up, folks didn't act surprised. It felt like this was the missing context they couldn't explain back then. Then came the bombshell from Kodak's own cousin. And that's what really lit the internet on fire. When G1 The Don went online and said that Kodak Black had sacrificed his team, it hit completely different. Because when your own blood steps up and calls you out publicly, people pay attention. G1 wasn't just a random voice. He was always seen as the street backbone behind Sniper Gang, the guy who handled pressure and protected Kodak's image so the music could shine. In older clips, G1 never talked like a rapper. He talked like muscle. Always confident, never backing down, always standing behind whatever came with Kodak's name. That's exactly why his tone during that viral video carried so much weight. He didn't sound like he was gossiping. He sounded hurt and angry, almost like a big brother trying to wake someone up. Right after Wiz the Wizard passed, G1 jumped online, mocking Kodak's emotional tweets about depression and sadness, telling him to stop acting like the victim and to stand on what he did. And then came the line that still echoes years later, "You sacrificed your team." It wasn't about saying Kodak pulled any trigger, it was deeper than that. G1 meant Kodak chose fame, ego, and music industry power, moves over loyalty to the people who helped build him. He let his closest ones fall out while he stayed online, tweeting about his pain like he was standing alone. That's the heart of G1, the Don's criticism. When Wiz the Wizard lost his life, G1 didn't just see a tragedy, he saw consequences. And if Wiz really was, in his words, sacrificed, then the next question people started asking was who else? Because when Wham Spin the Bin was ended, nobody instantly tied it to any official paperwork, RICO filings, or organized gang charts. On paper, police treated it as a completely separate case, a Hallandale Beach situation that they said came from a personal dispute, not an organized setup, not a planned hit, and definitely not a gang-related event. That distinction was important because it meant the public story didn't line up with what the streets were whispering. Reports said Wham was shot several times on a quiet residential block and later passed away at the hospital. Witnesses described loud gunfire, homes getting hit by stray rounds, and officers knocking door to door trying to piece it all together. Police were quick to claim that the shooter and the victim probably knew each other, framing it as something personal, not random, and basically calling the case wrapped, at least on paper. But to people watching closely, especially those who knew the Sniper Gang world, it didn't sit right. Wham had been part of that same circle as Wiz the Wizard and Kodak Black, appearing in Righteous Reaper's content, moving alongside the crew when everything looked loud, strong, and untouchable. Back then, they looked like a unit, young, rich, and running the game together. Fast forward a few years though, and that same lineup looks completely different. Wiz the Wizard, gone. Wham Spin the Bin, gone. Others locked up, indicted, or nowhere to be found. There's still no official paperwork connecting Wham's end to the Grand Mafia, Hot Boys, or Kodak himself. But from the outside looking in, it's starting to look like that once solid circle is shrinking fast. And that's exactly where Boosie Badazz comes in. Boosie's never been industry safe. He doesn't bite his tongue to protect friendships or upcoming releases. He only speaks when he feels the story's already too big to deny. So when Boosie jumped into this situation, it wasn't random. It happened right when the legal paperwork, the Broward County indictments, and the court watch pages all started lining up into something that the public could no longer pretend to ignore. That's not a coincidence. It's the pattern we've seen time and time again. These federal and county investigations usually move in silence, sometimes for years. The public doesn't hear a thing until the story is already carefully built behind the curtain. So, when outside voices suddenly start talking loud all at once, it usually means one thing: the silence stopped working. That's why Boosie Badazz's words didn't sound like gossip. They felt like a warning shot. Once someone with real credibility steps up and says something out loud, it gives everyone else the green light to stop pretending they don't see what's right in front of them, especially when the paperwork already exists. It just hasn't been fully brought into motion yet. And that's why people didn't dismiss what Boosie said this time. They listened, because when someone like Boosie speaks on a situation that's already sitting in quiet legal files, it means something bigger might already be happening. Let's keep it clear, though. This isn't about calling outcomes before they happen. It's about understanding the risk sitting underneath all of this. If this case ever gets reopened on a federal scale, it wouldn't be framed around, did Kodak do something himself? That's not how these kinds of cases move. It would fall under conspiracy, communication, and racketeering. See, conspiracy doesn't need proof that money actually exchanged hands. It's enough to show intent and coordination. RICO doesn't need one single act. It looks for patterns, networks, and long-term structure. And time doesn't always protect you the way people think it does. Once investigators label a situation as organized, they don't go chasing one smoking gun. They start building from relationships, coded messages, recurring patterns, and intent that ties everything together. And the real pressure, it doesn't always come from the top. It comes from the bottom, from the people staring down life sentences, the ones who suddenly need leverage just to breathe a little longer. That's usually when old texts start resurfacing, witnesses begin talking, and private conversations start getting new meaning. And if that happens here, it won't just reopen one case, it could rebuild the entire story around everything connected to it. Boosie Badazz didn't create this storyline. He just pulled the curtain back on what was already sitting there in silence. That 2021 situation involving Wiz the Wizard doesn't look like a standalone event anymore. That rumored $20,000 connection won't just disappear into thin air either. It's a detail that keeps coming back every time someone thinks the story's over. And here's what really gets people talking. There's a long list of names that once stood close to Kodak Black, and one by one, they've either gone missing, got locked up, or met mysterious fates. It's got fans wondering if Wiz the Wizard was really the only person tied to this dark chapter, or just the first one that people were forced to face. Even now, Kodak Black hasn't been officially charged with anything tied to Wiz the Wizard's end, but the questions still hang heavy. Was that $20,000 offer ever real? Was Wiz silenced before he could speak his truth? And if this ever hits a courtroom again, who's going to be the first to flip when that pressure hits? This story's still unfolding, and the streets are definitely watching. Hit that subscribe button and stay locked in, because what's coming next out of Broward County might shake the whole hood.